This is Here I Am, Batson and the Batsons, by ApatheticBaristia. Chapter 3. Unmasked but not hopeless. Summary. Jay meets Billy, or more accurately, Billy finds the Red Hood passed out in a garbage heap. To say that Jason was having a bad week would be a complete and utter understatement. First, it was a failed drug bust that resulted in him getting knocked unconscious, then getting his wallet stolen while he was out, then he got stabbed, and punched, and kicked, and his ankle sprained, and then he fell 4 stories, landed in a garbage truck, and now he was being thrown onto the side of the road in some godforsaken city he didn't even recognize. Oh, yeah, definitely a good week. Jason groaned as he tried to pull himself off the ground, duly noting that the ground was slick with water and the sound of rhythmic pattering filled his ears. To the once dead man, the rain was all just white noise to him. The cold seeped into his bones and sent a chill through his blood. He couldn't remember the last time he had been so miserable. Oh, wait, he could. But that wasn't the point. The point was that Jason Todd was tired and cold and hurting, and he had no idea where he was, with stab wounds and broken bones littered across his body. The Hood flipped himself onto his back, flinching as the wind and rain whipped his face with a rash gust and let out a breath of exertion. His red helmet was long gone, probably still somewhere in that garbage truck. His mask and leather jacket were torn to shreds. It was a miracle that the articles of clothing remained somewhat intact after all of this time. But what got to Jason was the fact that he was alone, in an abandoned alley of an unknown city, with no cash to get him back home and no way to contact help. It was all a big fucking mess. The vigilante let out a sigh of defeat. What now? He thought to himself. But nothing came to mind. I'll stay here till I think of something. So Jason laid there, on the cold, wet ground, listening to the purr of the rain and the cars that drove past him, wallowing in his pain and regretting every decision he had made that had led him to this moment. Man, he would really like to shoot something right now. His mind began to drift off, lured by the sweet relief of sleep, and his body relaxed. The tight muscles loosened, and his head rolled to the side, filled with cotton, and a nice warmth suddenly enveloped him. This wasn't death, because Jason knew what death felt like. No, this was the cousin of death. It was that deep and endless sleep one would drift off to when their body was in pain, when the physical world was just too much for them, and they needed to rest. It was a soulful sleep, and Jason welcomed it. The Red Hood had already drifted off into that black sea by the time a familiar red-clad hero flew off into the night with him in his arms, a white cape draped across Jason's sleeping form. Jason Todd woke up to the sound of clattering, like dishes in a kitchen. He woke up to a wrinkly, lumpy mattress, and a red blanket was thrown on top of him. He woke up to pale sunlight shining through a window with boards hammered over it, and he woke up to a crumbling apartment and an empty room. He woke up to the feeling of bandages over his stab wound and a sprained ankle. He woke up to a giant sweatshirt replacing his vigilante armor and nothing covering his face. And he woke up to a kid, no older than 10, offering him a plate of cold breakfast food. Jason stared at the boy, not fully knowing what to do, before bolting upright on the bed, suddenly gasping in pain. The kid's eyes widened, and he set down the food and rushed over. "Whoa there, mister!" he exclaimed. "You don't have any stitches in for that, so please don't move." Jason gripped his side, the one where he was stabbed, and glanced down. As the kid had said, there were no stitches, just some gauze and medical tape. "I know it's not the best," he said, "but it was all I had. I hope it's enough." The boy sat there, his hands up and at the ready in case Jason did anything. The man glanced at the raven again, and his eyebrows drew in confusion. "Who the hell are you?" he blurted out, his voice sounding like a toad who had been cooked in a microwave. "Where am I?" The boy dropped his hands and gave Jason an incredulous look and shook his head, standing up. It was as if he couldn't believe the question he was just asked. The boy walked over to the table and grabbed the plates of food again. He shuffled over to Jason and sat down on the mattress next to the Hood, handing a plate to the man. It was scrambled eggs, bacon, and a granola bar. "Really? Someone saves your life and you don't even offer a thank you?" he scoffs. "Honestly, mister, I would have expected something nicer. But then again, maybe I should have expected that from someone from Gotham. And you're in my apartment, by the way, in Fawcett." Jason stiffened. "How did you know I was from Gotham?" The kid pointed to a corner of the room, and Jason followed his finger to find his red hood gear sitting on top of a decaying chair, looking at him innocently. As if it wasn't some kind of damning evidence that would surely send this kid to the press, telling them all about how the Red Hood's secret identity was the dead Wayne boy, leading them to connect the dots that Bruce was Batman, Dick was Nightwing, and Damian was Robin, Tim was Red Robin, and everyone else in their family being exposed. All because of one bad week. The vigilante gulped, and his eyes shifted to the boy, who was just looking at him funny. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm not saying anything. The last thing I need is attention anyway. I don't want to draw social workers and foster parents here." Jason's eyes widened at the boy's statement. "Now hurry up and eat your breakfast. I'm not going to go back to the diner again and order another one," the raven-haired kid said before digging into his food. Jason glanced around the apartment, noticing just how bad it looked. It was obvious that the kid lived on his own, or on the streets, and it was even more obvious that he had been in the foster system. Maybe he was one of those few who simply slipped through the cracks of the system. The man glanced down at his food, taking one note of how good it smelled, even when it was cold. The kid handed him a fork, and, almost cautiously, he began to eat. It was one of the best non-Alfred Backstreet Diner breakfasts he'd ever had. Jason's stomach grumbled loudly, and suddenly pain flared inside of it. He gripped his stomach in pain and groaned. How long had it been since he last ate food? The kid seemed to pick up on this, and set down his now empty plate. "Oh, that doesn't sound good. When was the last time you ate a meal? And I don't mean snacks like chips or anything, like an actual sit-down meal," he asked curiously. Jason looked up in thought and tried to think. It was embarrassing how long it took for him to find his answer. "About 2 weeks. The boy was silent for a moment before sighing. "Well, all right. At least you're getting food now. Let's try it again. Maybe now your body will accept it." The next hour or so compiled of Jason trying to get food into his body without it hurting or him throwing up. It had been a long time since he last ate breakfast as good as this one. But then again, at this point in his life, as long as it was hot and not moldy, he was fine with it. When the last of the eggs had disappeared and the final bite of granola was eaten, Jason glanced at the kid and opened his mouth. "How long was I out?" he asked. The kid shrugged. "About 3 days. You were really hurt. I was just starting to wonder if I should bring you to the hospital." Jason scoffed. "Yeah, I'm glad you didn't. That probably wouldn't have ended well." "Why not?" The older raven waved his hand, as if he was swatting a fly. "That's complicated." The boy crossed his arms and sat up straight. "More complicated than me, a street kid finding the Red Hood in a back alley with blood dripping off of him and knocked unconscious with no mask?" Turquoise and cornflower blue eyes met, and once again Jason scoffed at the kid, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Yeah, a little bit." The kid huffed in annoyance before standing up and walking toward the door, pulling on a thin jacket and tugging on some holey shoes. "Hey, wait a second, where are you going?" Jason called. The raven looked back at the man, an annoyed look on his face. "Well, I'm going out to get some work, earn some money, and buy some more painkillers for you, since, I ran out giving you the last few I had." He opened the door. "Stay here, or else." "Hold on a minute, kid." The boy turned around, sending the man a look. "What?" "What's your name? I might as well know the name of my savior, after all. And, besides, I want to know." The raven was silent for a moment, and for a split second, Jason thought that the kid wasn't going to tell him. It wasn't uncommon among street kids to keep their names to themselves. The boy closed the door behind him without a word. The kid came back a few hours later with a small bag in hand and grumbling to himself, head down. He set down the bag harshly and dug around inside it, pulling out a small white bottle and opening it. Jason could hear the rattling of pills inside it, and he assumed that the kid had succeeded in his quest to find the money for painkillers. He watched as the boy shook a few into his hand and popped them into his mouth, dry swallowing them. The vigilante's eyebrows furrowed as the smaller raven closed the bottle again and then tossing it to Jason. The older man caught the bottle purely out of reflex, and he looked down at the bottle before his gaze shifted to the kid, who was, for some reason, holding up his hand to his face. "What?" the kid said defensively. Jason warily opened the bottle and took out a few for himself. "Nothing," Jason said. "Just wondering why you'd had to take ibuprofen, and why you're covering your face." The older raven put a pill in his mouth and smirked knowingly. The kid sent him a light glare, realizing that he had been caught with his actions, and then he lowered his hand, revealing the long cut that had settled itself along his cheek. That definitely wasn't there before. Jason's smirk disappeared. fuck, he thought to himself. The kid fidgeted with the hem of his sweater for a moment, before suddenly turning away and walking to the cupboard. He pulled out a small granola bar and began munching on it quietly. Jason could tell that he didn't want to talk about it, but he did. "What happened?" he asked, his voice urgent. The kid sighed and muttered to himself. Something about being a dick? Jason narrowed his eyes. "Hey," he said again. The boy turned around to face him, his blue eyes hard. "What happened?" Jason asked again. The kid sighed, and crossing his arms, he glared at Jason. "Well, I got the money to pay for painkillers, but I lost the rest of it when some stupid group of junkies decided to harass me. Happy?" No, Jason was not happy. "What?" he said, feeling suddenly infuriated. "That's fucking bullshit." The kid shrugged. "Yeah, well, you wanted to know, and it happens sometimes." Jason shook his head and began to throw the red blanket off him. "Nope, that's not happening under my watch." With a grunt, the Red Hood stood up off the mattress, and the little kid rushed forward when he saw him sway on his feet. "Hey, you gotta be careful. I don't need you hurting yourself more than you already are. You'll get blood everywhere." Jason waved him aside. I've been through worse." He began walking toward the chair with his suit on, and struggled to pull off the red hoodie and put on his long-sleeved black shirt. The entire time, the kid watched him, unimpressed. There was one point when Jason had gotten stuck and didn't move for a good 2 minutes. The kid still did nothing to help, and instead he tried to stifle the snorts and snickers that Jason could still hear. But after a painstakingly long time, he had gotten his shirt on, only to realize that it was peppered with small holes and a long gash that went right along with his stab wound. The man groaned. He was going to have to take it off again. That could wait. There was something more pressing than taking care of himself. He turned to face the kid, and he crossed his arms, trying his best to look tall and confident and authoritative. And yet still, the kid looked at him as if he were the lamest thing in the world. "All right, first things first, I'm teaching you how to fight back against a bunch of shitty junkies." The boy's smirk disappeared from his face and was replaced with a look of surprise. "Wait, what?" he said. "No, I don't need your help." "Yeah, you do. Come on, don't you want to be taught by the Red Hood on how to fight bad guys and kick their asses?" No, I do not. I do just fine on my own." "Oh, come on, when else are you going to be able to meet and get fighting lessons from a superhero, or outlaw, whatever?" The boy remained quiet for a moment, and Jason thought that it was because he had finally gotten to him. But really, Billy was thinking of just how ironic of a statement that was. He, a 10-year-old, who could turn into a superhero and hang out with other superheroes whenever he wanted, was being offered fighting lessons from another superhero who had no idea that he was a superhero. It was just too hilarious. This whole thing was just too hilarious. For never did Billy Batson expect to find an injured member of the Bat family lying in the alleyway, in the cold just outside of his apartment, and have to treat him for a butt-ton of injuries and wounds that he had no idea how to treat with the limited medical supplies that he had. How hilarious indeed. Billy scoffed and shook his head. Jason looked at the kid confused. Why was he laughing? "No, I don't need lessons. I can take care of myself perfectly." "Well, that cut on your face seems to tell a different story." Billy stopped laughing, and his lips thinned, while the older man shrugged. The air was tense in the moments leading up to his reply. "Fine," Billy snapped. "One lesson, but that's it. I don't want to be dragged down and turned into another Robin." Jason barked a laugh, having not expected that, but it was cut short due to his side hurting. He clenched his stomach and winced, but a trickle of a chuckle still fell from his lips. "Okay," he said. "Fair enough. No Robining for you, then. And trust me, I wasn't even thinking about making you a Robin. As if Batman needs any more black-haired, blue-eyed kids." Billy scoffed and let the ghost of a smile flit across his face. "Yeah, I know. Where does he keep getting you guys? I legit think that there's a specific orphanage he goes to." Billy giggled and uncrossed his arms, standing upright, and Jason was slightly surprised at how small the kid really was. Sometimes he forgot how tall he was compared to other people, children especially. "Well, I guess now would be a good time to tell you, but my name's Billy," the kid said as he stuck out a hand for Jason to shake. The older man looked at the hand outstretched to him and smiled. He clasped it with his non-bloodied hand and shook it, noticing the strong grip the kid had. "Call me Jay." Well, as it turns out, Jason had vastly underestimated Billy's fighting abilities. Because the kid was gutsy. He didn't show any fear when facing off the Red Hood of Gotham, the nightmare of criminals everywhere, and he didn't waver in his decisions. He was a tough kid, but then again, you had to be when you lived on the streets. And he also fought dirty, which both offended and impressed Jason at the same time. When Jason would pretend to punch him, he would duck underneath the slow-moving fist and immediately take the opening to hit Jason's open injury. Of course, he didn't actually do it. They were just slow-mo fighting, and Jason was only fixing forms and suggesting different techniques. You don't jump right into sparring with someone. But still, the actions and split-second decisions that he made kind of surprised the vigilante. So for the last 2 hours or so, the two raven-haired boys pretended to fight each other, and they only took a break when Jason's injury started to itch uncomfortably. So they sat down at the rattling, rotting table, and Jason got to work on removing the bandages and applying new ones. Billy had insisted on helping, but Jason refused. He wasn't going to let a little kid do something that he could clearly do on his own. Plus, seeing a barely healed open wound was nasty, so he did the bandaging by himself while Billy watched and munched on a small bag of chips. The air was silent between them before Billy spoke up. "Jay isn't your real name, is it?" he asked. Jason didn't look up from his task. "No, it's not. It's a nickname." "Huh, what's it short for?" Jason scoffed. "Like I'd tell you." Billy shifted in his seat. "Well, I mean, we bonded, so don't I get to know your full name? I'll tell you my full name if it helps." "Your full name's William," Jason said, still not looking up. "And Billy is a nickname for it. Why is it, though? I have no clue, but good luck figuring out my full name." Billy huffed and leaned back into his rocky chair. "You're just like Dick," he muttered to himself, but Jason still heard him loud and clear. The vigilante immediately stopped what he was doing and glanced up at Billy, turquoise eyes alert with confusion and curiosity. "I'm sorry, what?" he said. "I remind you of who now?" Billy sighed. "It's just some mister I met a while ago. He helped me out and gave me medical supplies, and the blanket and a cool stuffed tiger. His name was Dick, but it was really short for Richard, which I thought was kind of weird." Jason's eyes shifted. It was impossible, right? There was no way that his Dick was the same one that the kid was talking about. It had to be a coincidence, right? But then again, didn't Dick go through Fawcett on his way back to Gotham a couple of weeks back? Jason rubbed his fingers together and then turned back to his task of rebandaging his side, his mind going a mile a minute. Maybe it was just another guy named Dick who just so happened to live in Fawcett City and have the same kind of niceness powers that his Dick Grayson seemed to have. Maybe that was it. Yeah, that probably was it, unless... Jason finished up his work quickly and then stood up from the chair, tossing aside the leftover gauze and tape onto the table. Billy's eyes widened slightly in surprise, and he watched confusedly as Jason walked over to the chair and began pulling on the rest of his suit. "Wait," Billy said. "Where are you going? You can't leave yet. Your wounds have barely healed." Jason strapped on one of his gun holsters. "Yeah, well, sorry, kid, but I need to go check something out. You know, superhero stuff." "Was it something I said?" Jason bobbed his head and tugged on his leather jacket, wincing slightly as the medical tape stretched across his skin. Yeah, kinda. Just an idea I gotta follow up on." The vigilante looked around the room and glanced over everything. He was missing something. Where was it? Billy sighed loudly from his chair and stood up, shuffling over to Jason with his shoulders drooping tiredly. "What are you looking for?" he asked, clearly done with dealing with Jason's shit. "My mask. It's gone." "Yeah," the kid said, shrugging. "I had to throw it away. It was torn to shreds." "What? Come on, kid. Are you serious?" "Yes, it wouldn't have helped keep your identity, and besides, it was all bloody and icky, so I just threw it in the trash." "Oh, you gotta be shitting me. That was the only mask I had." "What? The Red Hood is hoodless?" Billy asked with a shit-eating grin. Jason lightly glared at him before ruffling the boy's hair. "Hey!" he exclaimed indignantly. The man chuckled before turning to face the window at the end of the room and walking towards it. "Then I guess I'll have to make do without it." They were covered up with old wooden boards that were soon taken apart or broken off. Jason set down the splintered wood and then sat down on the open windowsill, one foot still in the apartment, and the other one hanging off the ledge. The outlaw glanced down at the alley below him and shrugged. It wasn't too far of a drop, about 3 stories, and he doubted that it would hurt him more than he already was. He turned back to face Billy, and Jason placed his hands on his hips. "Well," he said, I guess this is it. Until next time, Billy, and hopefully next time I can give you a more proper fighting lesson. Yeah, and maybe next time you won't be half dead on my doorstep with no mask. No promises. Billy smiled and shook his head. Jason gave one last lopsided smirk, saluted, and then swung his leg over the ledge and jumped down. He landed with a grunt and rolled on the cold pavement. His stab wound jostled by the movement, and he began a light jog down the alley. His breath came out in small wisps, and he felt as if he couldn't breathe properly, but that was probably just because he was injured. He reached the end of the alley and looked back at the apartment he had jumped out of. Billy was leaning out of it and watching. He gave the Red Hood a small smile and waved to him, and Jason couldn't help the grin that grew on his face, nor the returning wave. But as he was looking up at the apartment, something came to his mind. Brows furrowed, the ebony-haired teen looked down at the ground and then back up at the window where Billy was sitting. And then Jason thought of a question that he couldn't even begin to know how to answer. How did a small, scrawny kid like Billy carry him up to his apartment? This was Here I Am, Batson and the Batsons by ApatheticBaristia. If you liked this, let me know in the comments and let ApatheticBaristia know on the original story. And if you have any other ideas for podfics I could read, let me know in the comments, and I'll see what I can do. Thanks for listening.